Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to be chatting with Jane Harper about her new novel, Exiles. Welcome, Jane.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. And you're here in California at the same time I am, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, great. Absolutely. It's exciting to be here on publication day. It makes it so much more special to be here to see it actually out in the wild.
Wonderful, wonderful. And congratulations on, this is your fifth novel, is that right?
Yeah, it is my fifth Australian mystery. Yeah.
Oh, it is so wonderful. You know, in some authors, their location is definitely a character, and that is certainly true for your books. Why Marilee Valley or South Australia for this one?
Yeah, so this one, Exiles is set in, beautiful wine country in South Australia, which is a really sort of, South Australia is really well known for its wine country. So for this one, this is the third and final book featuring Aaron Falk, who's the detective we first met in The Dry. And for this one, he goes to South Australia for the christening of the child of one of his good friends, the Reiko family. And they are from South Australia. Probably nobody else remembers that but me. In the Dry, it was briefly mentioned they're from South Australia. So that was kind of partly what put me on that track in the first place. And then secondly, it was just such a beautiful location. I mean, it was somewhere that I felt was really good for his character because it had that kind of country feel that he's a country boy at heart. So, and it was just a glorious place to kind of research and try and bring to the page.
I love it. I love it. I know you live in Melbourne now. Are you from Melbourne or are you from a small town?
I'm actually from the UK, actually, originally. And I used to work, before I wrote my first book, I used to work as a print journalist on regional newspapers. So I spent a lot of time covering community fates, school stories, parish council meetings, all kinds of like the little kind of intricacies that kind of make a community what they are. And I think that, I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, that really helped me a lot. Write these stories that I think hope kind of capture the kind of ebb and flow of community life.
It's very different. I now live in a large city and I like living in a large city, but I grew up in a very, very small community of about 450 people in Eastern North Carolina. And one of the things that I notice in your novels is people who live in a large city see life different than people who live in a country setting or a small rural setting, because in a smaller place, you do know the people around you. And that is one thing that, once again, Aaron's brought back to a small community. And it's wonderful to see the inner workings of a small community because secrets are very different there. Do you feel that way?
Oh, completely. I completely agree. And I think you've absolutely identified the beauty of writing about a small community there, because I find in a city, there's so many escape routes. There's people coming and going. There's 1,000 coffee shops to sit in. You're not going to sit in a coffee shop and see 5 of your closest neighbors. Whereas, I mean, from a purely technical standpoint, writing about a small community is so much gives you so many more opportunities to make the characters interact because they're forced to, because there's not many other people. So you have these very natural interactions and people are forced to kind of get along with people that they maybe would naturally not choose to. So from that standpoint, it's just a writer's dream, really.
And as the reader, it is for me as well, because we see something that's very different. We live in a technological world, and in your books, we have modern technology. But if you put those in a large city, I think a lot of times we get lost because everything is so rapid. Here, the reader gets to enjoy watching the layers be peeled back on what's going on locally.
That's it. And I personally, as a reader, just enjoy books where everything is kind of contained within sort of the bubble of the book. That the questions and the answers are all within this sort of set cast of characters in this location, and it's just a question of unraveling it at what stage you find out what's at the heart of that question.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things you do. And I assume most readers won't think that accounting or forensic accounting is very sexy, but Aaron actually brings that in to be, that's one thing, that his mind is so sharp. Are you fond of numbers?
Well, no, not more than the average person, I would say. But it's funny because when I was building his character, sometimes people ask kind of where did the character come from initially, and he was first introduced in my novel The Dry, which was set in a small drought-stricken community where he returns to the funeral of his friends. And one thing I kind of often say to aspiring authors is you don't a character doesn't have to be kind of fully formed when you're first thinking about it, and the characters are there as a tool in the same way as language and plot, the plot choices, and they're there to help move the story forward. And so a lot of decisions about Falk, I wish I had a beautiful romantic story about how he came to me in a dream. I thought, what a great character, I'm going to write about you. But in actual fact, I mean, like he was the building blocks of him were very functional. So I made him a financial detective because I wanted him to have some policing experience, but not be kind of a slick city homicide cop who's going to come in and show these country boys how it's done. I wanted him to be uncomfortable in this situation, being asked to kind of look into the death of his friend, really, not have, a huge skill set to bring to the table in that field, but have his own kind of, his own sort of benefits that he could bring in, his inside knowledge of the family and things like that. So that was kind of the reason why he had the job that he did. But I like it because it kind of gives him, he does have this sort of, he's not just rolling into town kind of showing people how it's done. He does have a more slightly arm's length view of things, I think.
And I think also because he, in The Dry, we see his hometown or where he grew up, and what we see once again, when it's a small community, it's very different. You can come in with guns blazing, but you won't get very many answers that way because people will put up defenses because this is their bubble and they don't want someone to burst it. And so that was one of the beautiful things about seeing Aaron come in, because he's a bit shy in a lot of ways, but he's extraordinarily respectful of other people. And that too is a very nice thing to read on the page.
And I think in Exiles, one of the big draws of setting in that small town community in South Australia was that, for me, it kind of mirrors his own community in Victoria where he grew up, but in a very positive way. So his own sort of hometown, he doesn't have hugely positive associations with it. He's had some troubled times there. It's a community under pressure. There's a lot of relationships under strain there. And then he comes to this South Australian town, and it's everything kind of touches him as a country boy at heart, but people do, at least on the surface, certainly get along, and there's it's a thriving community and it rubs along well, and it kind of gives him, I think, a little bit of a sort of opens a door to his mind as to what could be and what he maybe really wants.
So I know that several characters in the book suggest or hint maybe he'll leave the big city and go to the country. Is that something you would consider doing in life?
Do you know, I personally wouldn't right now. I mean, partly things like I have 2 children and one of them's at school now and things like that. So, but I have to say during the last few years with COVID and people, having really huge changes to their lifestyle, I think so many of us, and me included, really reflected on, I guess this, how we were living and what we really wanted to be, life to look like when we came out of it. And I think certainly in Australia, that was a very sort of common theme and a lot of things, something that people were talking about. And I think that probably certainly sort of fed into this book in that way. Although it's not a COVID book, it doesn't sort of refer to anything like that. But I think that idea of just taking stock of your life and reflecting on where you are is kind of one of those themes that really sort of came out to me, certainly as an author.
I like that. And I think that a lot of my friends and I here in the States, we had the same reaction. Some things that we thought were so important all of a sudden become not so important. And I think that is so directly mirrored in this book because Aaron has a lot to think about. And I think that's something that really talked to me because I recognize that. I feel like we all go through we've been through that in the past few years, but I think we also all go through that in life where we start taking stock of things. A pandemic made a lot of us stop and take stock, but I think that oftentimes people do that.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I think at certain times in your life, certain milestones, finishing school, maybe finishing university or your sort of apprenticeship or whatever you're doing, getting married, having children, all those kind of things, changing jobs, they all are opportunities where I think you are forced to sort of think, is this what I want? And am I on the right path? And sometimes people don't have the opportunity to change that. And I think when you do, it is something that is, it is something that people tend to consider quite closely because it doesn't come along at all the time. There's maybe a few points where it's possible.
That's right. That's right. So with this novel and murder and mystery, as you always have, and you write so eloquently about, you also have an enormous romance novel in this book as well. I mean, the relationships, all of the characters have relationships one way or another, and there's a lot of romance, and it was just an everyday life event, but it was so beautiful. Was that on your mind?
Oh, thanks, Dan. I really appreciate that. I really enjoyed kind of writing that aspect of it. And I think because for me, the books, they're always kind of placed on like the crime or mystery shelf, and which I'm 100% happy with. I think that's where they belong. But for me, the crime or the mystery at the heart, well, at the start of the novel is more for me the catalyst for what happens next. And what's at the heart of it is the relationships between the characters and what's kind of, I guess, led them to these moments that are unfolding in the book. And a big part of that was, the relationship between Falk and the various people he meets, and also the relationships within that established group of, of friends and family as well. And that is one of my kind of favorite things to bring out, because I think that's what really, drives us all. And it's something that we can all kind of relate to.
I've noticed all along that Greg and Rita Reiko are such loving individuals with each other, and in turn are the same way with Aaron. And I think that that's a wonderful thing to read. And I think that a lot of times authors shy away from it, at least in my opinion. I really, really will pat you on the back that I just love their relationship with each other and with their friend Aaron. And it's important. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, thank you. I do. And I think as a reader, I get a little tired of constantly reading relationships where people are just horrible to each other,
Yes.
under the guise of, I don't know, a marriage being under stress or whatever. And I mean, most of the people I know, are lucky enough to kind of have, good relationships with their significant others. And I've sort of, sometimes you hear, I remember, in kind of the early days of when you're reading sort of writing, how to write guides and things like that, people often say things like, good relationships are not interesting. But I disagree. And I think, within a novel, there's a place for lots of different relationships, and they don't all have to be challenging. And one of my favorite things about this novel is how gentle Rita and Greg are with Falk. They're there for him. They are a really solid, reliable kind of sort of pillar in his life, and something that I think he sort of kind of aspires to have, that sort of emotional security and maturity that they demonstrate daily.
And it really is beautiful to read, and I find it to be exciting to read on the page. I enjoy books where people have a troubled relationship, whether it's their family or at work, because sometimes it drives the story along, but something that is gentle and real and genuine can be just as beautiful and just as exciting, because you get to root for someone. You want them to win.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, sometimes, absolutely, sometimes there's places where, you need people to have that kind of friction. But sometimes with secondary characters, you don't, and just shoehorning it in for the sake of a little bit of extra drama that's really detracting from the main, points you're trying to make in the plot and in that chapter. I think sometimes, too much is too much, and it does room for that sort of just a little bit more gentle pace with it.
So in both The Dry and Exiles, there is a small child involved. And I found myself so compelled by that because in both situations, the child is left alone. And that is something that is, you know, a maternal paternal instinct wants you to help. And so I know you have two children. How old are they?
They are 6 and 3.
Oh,
Um,
lovely.
yeah, so they're very young, and I think the you know, when your children are that age, your life is so parent focused. You know, it's so I think inevitably that does absolutely creep in. And when I think about, you know, I suppose situations that you know, would trouble me and would concern me. I mean, you know, sometimes I suppose as any parent, that sort of is something your mind naturally goes to. I do always say though, as to, you know, whenever I'm sort of talking about this book, I always make the point in Exiles that there's a baby found at this start alone in the pram, and a mother has gone missing, and that's what sort of sparks the whole question. But I always make the point the baby is fine, like the baby is fine. Yes. She's tucked up, she's safe, she's in a safe place, she's away from the elements, she's found very quickly, because I feel that's a very different kind of book, you know, if not. So I just want to put people's minds, you know, at rest immediately. The baby is totally fine. You know?
Well, and I agree because it would definitely put you on a different shelf. That's for sure. That's right. Yeah. And I love the fact that there's something in the book that I'm trying to figure out how to say this exactly right. So there's sort of like a child lead. So not the baby in the pram, but there's something that happens with Eva, and it is just so natural. And it reminds me yet again, if we simply listen to children, because children tell us the truth. And that is something that is just so, you know, it's simple, but it's very important in life that, and not only children, but we have to listen. If you're going to be a good detective, you have to listen.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the key points about, I think, writing not just a mystery, but maybe any book that I've sort of learned certainly over the course of 5 books, is that you know, you have to really keep at the forefront of your mind that every character is seeing this situation differently. So they're not seeing it as how I'm seeing it as an author, and they're certainly not seeing it as the main character is seeing it. Everybody's bringing their own life experience to it, be that a child or be that someone who's lived in the community for 80 years or whatever. And the beauty of each one of those is they are seeing things slightly differently. And there's an opportunity there with each one to shed a little bit of fresh light on the situation if you kind of allow them to, you know, get their point of view across, you know, at an appropriate moment. So it does feel a little bit like balls to juggle sometimes, and it can be kind of tempting to sort of think, you know, all characters are seeing things the same way, you know, when you've got a lot on and you're sort of really trying to balance things out. But it's worth at some point in the writing process just you know, looking at each individual character and thinking, what are they seeing when they're seeing this scene? They're not all seeing the same thing, and what can they maybe bring to it?
I love that. I love that, because it is true. We don't all see the same thing. We may all see a blue car or a blue shirt or a green hat or whatever, but everyone sees it slightly different. And it has served you well. That's for sure. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
So, how was it different? So your first novel was made into a movie that I've seen twice and loved both times. Is that something that is on the radar again, or is that something, it must be different. I'm trying to step very carefully because I don't want to discourage one way or another, but is that something that an author like you would be interested in again, or is that not something that is on your radar?
Yeah, well, so I love the Dry adaptation. I thought it was such a beautiful, thoughtful kind of companion to the book. You know, I thought the director and screenwriter, who's a guy called Robert Connolly in Australia, I thought really, you know, understood the book, and he absolutely set out to kind of capture that, you know, what was that at the heart of it. So I loved it. I was actually in it. I don't know if you've seen it. There's 2 times we've seen it. I don't know if you've seen me and my husband playing grieving mourners at the funeral. We were in the second row next, and when you see it on your 3rd viewing, you have to pause it for a second.
Now I'm going to rent it again because now I need to know.
You don't have to watch very far. We're in the first like a minute and a half, and you have to don't look down at your popcorn because you'll miss it. But we're right there, sort of, really setting up the scene, I feel. So it was beautiful. And then actually some exciting news is, so the whole team behind the draw, the same people, Robert Connolly and the team, the production team, have finished filming Force of Nature, which is the second book featuring Aaron Falk. I didn't get to be in this one, but I did go out on the set, and I have seen a kind of a rough cut of the film, and it's really great. Like, they've done it, I feel they've done it again. They've got this fantastic cast. The scenery is beautiful. It really, I think, celebrates the book. And so I'm not sure how long it'll be till that's finishing on screens, but yeah, watch this space, because it can't be too far off.
I love that. I'm very excited. Once again, the book is Exiles by Jane Harper. It is so magnificent. I can't recommend it enough. Do you have a website or social media you would like to share?
Yeah, sure. So my website is janeharper.com.au. I've got that Australian suffix on the end. And from there, you can link to all my social media as well, which is basically variations of Jane Harper, author.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining me. The book was delicious. My chat was delicious, and I look forward to doing it again.
Oh, thanks, Dan. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Hang on for me just a second. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at Go Out with Dan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.